Starting a new topic here in our class today called Telling the Story of Jesus. We're focusing on the topic of evangelism. And so what I want to do is I want to start with my disclaimer, which is that by no means am I an expert in this topic, right? I think probably most of us would wish that we were experts, wish that we had some really fantastic skills in this regard. But really what the goal of this class is for me is I want us to just have this conversation together, add some maybe tools to our toolbox as, okay, if I'm going to have a conversation with somebody, maybe at my work or just out in the world, how can I do a good job of trying to tell the story of Jesus through my actions, through my words, through natural moments in conversation. I think when it comes to evangelism, we'll talk about this a little bit today, but we get really scared of this word. And I think people that we might have as people that we want to evangelize, if they found out that we were trying to evangelize them, they would get really scared of that too. They'd say, "Whoa, I thought we were just friends. Now you're trying to now you're trying to pull something on me here." You know, the way that I think about this is, I imagine that somebody who finds out that you're trying to evangelize them might rather have a conversation with their boss where they're getting fired than to hear that you're trying to evangelize them, right? I mean, this has become a very scary topic, a very scary word. And so what I want to do over the next a couple weeks is just try to give us some tools, try to share in conversation. Some of you in this room are probably much better at this than I am. And so please don't think of me as an expert. I'm just an interested party. And I think this is something that we ought to at least put some intentionality towards. So what I want to do now is just kind of give you a very brief outline of Rebecca. We might. See, we had this whole conversation. There it goes. I got it, Reb. About my clicker. Rick is a master up here. He stands up here with a clicker and he clicks the button, and every time it goes to the next slide. This is the first time I've ever gotten a clicker to move to the next slide in this room. But this is kind of what we're going to be talking about over the next 12 weeks or so. So today we're going to be talking about why should we evangelize? What is the background of why this might matter? Next week we'll talk about what is evangelism. What are the things that we want to share when we talk about that? We'll talk about what is the gospel specifically, and I think there's some if you were here back in October when Randy Harris was here for Mission Sunday, he gave a really great 3-point summation of what the gospel is. So we'll talk about that week and maybe a couple of other things as well. What exactly are we trying to tell people when we try to tell them about Jesus? You know, what is the heart of the gospel? What is the heart of our story? How do we share our faith? This is going to be a fun week. If you like to get mad at teachers, this is your week. Week 4. Be here week 4, and you can get mad at me. And then after that, we'll finally start to get into some of the tools that I want to share with you, things that I think would be helpful for us as we're talking about this. So we'll talk about prayer and the person of peace. The person of peace it comes from Scripture. I'm not making that term up. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about spiritual conversations. I think this is the key. This is the heart of how we go about evangelizing. Is rather than telling people we're trying to evangelize them, we enter into spiritual conversations with them and allow ourselves to have a little bit of a relationship and back and forth on what these spiritual conversations look like. We'll talk about Discovery Bible Study. So if you get to the point where somebody is ready to talk to you about Scripture and they're brand new, they have no idea who Jesus is, Discovery Bible Study, it's great for people who have been to Scripture before too, but it's a great tool for beginners as well. And so we'll talk about what that is and how to do that. I think asking good questions is one of the most important things you can do to somebody that you're trying to spend some time telling them about Jesus. I think so often we think we've got to tell them everything that they need to know. And I want to flip the script and say, no, we need to start asking better questions. I think that's a better way of going about evangelism. If you disagree, we'll have a lively discussion that week, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say. But I think that's a really good thing. And I really like images and metaphors, and so I'm going to talk about that a little bit and how we can use images and metaphors to help people understand faith rather than trying to give them doctrine or things like that are very, very, I don't know if they're high level, but people who are brand new to faith might not be interested in those types of conversations, and they might be more interested in images and metaphors. And then the last 3 weeks, what I want to do is spend some time talking about what happens after, let's say you're successful, you evangelize somebody, we baptize them. What happens next? Because so often I think we think evangelism ends at baptism, but the story of faith is a lifelong journey. And so the next 3 weeks we'll be talking about what happens after a baptism occurs with somebody, because it's really important for us to not just abandon a new believer. We baptized them, we did it, let's move on to the next person. No, we need to stay and continue on in life with them. So does that make sense? Any comments, questions on that? Hopefully that makes sense. That's just kind of an outline of what we're going to be talking about. I like outlines. I think that's helpful for me. So if it's helpful for you, then great. Okay, so like I said, today we're talking about why should we evangelize. So before I dive into some of the stuff that I've prepared, off the top of your heads, with no prep work, why should we evangelize? Why does this matter?
Spread the gospel.
Yeah, okay, so obedience. Obedience to God, because God said we should do this. Go into all the world, tell people the story of Jesus, baptize. Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Melody, I think you were going to say something too. Yeah, 28. Yeah, good. So, okay, good. Obedience. I like that. What else? Anybody?
I personally believe the life in Christ is full of joy and peace, and it's the easiest way to go through life.
Yeah.
And I think that I think people that are living life in Christ have this hole in them that is never filled.
Yeah.
And I want a better life for my neighbor.
Yeah. Good. Good. Yeah. So we want people to understand the life that Jesus has to offer them. I'll push back on one word. You said easiest. I'll change that to best, if that's okay. It's not always easy. It can be very difficult at times, but I think this is the best way to live. I think it is the most holistic, loving, kind. How many people in here enjoy conflict? Anybody? There are some people who really do enjoy conflict. Cade, okay? Okay, and Leslie. So the way of Christ doesn't mean that you will be without conflict. I think Jesus is pretty clear that there's going to be times that you're going to go through conflict. But at the same time, there's this peace, and I think joy was the word that you used. There's this joy, there's this sense of something is right with the way that Christ has called us to live. And so it doesn't mean that you're going to go without conflict, but it does tend to be this more peaceful type life, joy-filled type life. So good. Okay, I don't want to skip. Anybody else before we dive in? Okay, so these are reasons why we should evangelize, perhaps. What are some reasons why we don't evangelize? Does anybody have any ideas off the top of your head about why we don't evangelize?
Fear.
Fear. Yeah, fear of what?
Fear of offending somebody. Fear of, I don't know, I think to evangelize, you have to kind of make this assumption that somebody is lost.
Yeah.
And it's not popular in churches or in the world to kind of come to a conclusion that somebody might be lost.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, good. Okay, so fear of, what was the word you used again? Offending people, right? Offense. And then I heard rejection. So fear that somebody, let's imagine a scenario where this is at the very least an acquaintance, possibly a friend that we're talking to. And so if they reject us, do we just ruin our friendship? Do we just ruin, maybe it's a coworker, do we just ruin our working relationship with this person by doing this? Yeah, good. Anything else? Yep. Yeah, don't know it. Yeah, what if they ask a question that I don't know the answer to? I've failed, right? You know, they'll turn away from Jesus because I don't know the answer, or something like that. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else?
For me personally, like, oh, missionaries do that. Like, I'm not a missionary.
Yeah.
Missionaries do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like,
Yeah. Man, you guys are reading my notes this morning. Y'all want to just come up here? Everybody come up here. Y'all teach my class, and I'll come sit out there. And yeah. No, but that's fantastic. That's exactly right. So I asked, so Jacob is going through a conversation with our teens. I promise I'm not just over and over again stealing from Jacob with our Wednesday night class and now this, but he's going through a similar conversation with our teens on evangelism right now. And they're a little bit ahead of us. And he asked them, why would we not evangelize people that we know, our friends, our other students at our school, things like that. And these are the main three things that they said. They said, I don't know enough, which we talked about that. They said, I'm not good enough. And then I don't care enough, which I thought, man, that's absolutely true. for us, right? So I think especially numbers 1 and 2, and I think a lot of us would probably push back against number 3, but then how many of us are really working hard on trying to tell people about Jesus? Hopefully some of us are, but I know I could do better, right? I know I could do this more intentionally. So we talked about I don't know enough. I'm not good enough one. What I told Jacob had me teach down there a couple weeks ago, and what I told them is, I'm really glad that you said that as a reason, because that means that you understand the gospel, because nobody is good enough. And that's kind of the whole point of our story of having faith in Jesus, is that none of us are good enough. And so, okay, even though none of us are quote unquote good enough, what does that mean for us now to go and try and tell people, hey, I'm not good enough. I had to turn to Jesus. I think that's a great entry point. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
You get more approachable to you.
Mm-hmm.
You're laying it out.
Yeah, and that's one of the first exercises. I'm not gonna. Don't worry, I'm not gonna force you guys to do this. You can do this if you'd like, but we're not gonna do it as an exercise in class. But that was one of the first things Jacob had our teens do, is to write their testimonies, right? Why they came to Jesus. Why do they think that Jesus is important? And so that was one of the first things that they did in their class. And then a couple that I wanted to add. So these are the 3 answers that our teenagers gave, and then a couple that I wanted to add. We touched on, I think, at least one of them just a second ago. But this one I know is I am especially guilty of this one, and I'll give you my excuse. It's not a good enough excuse, but I'll give you my excuse anyways. So I don't know enough non-Christians. Does anybody feel like they might fit into that category? No, okay, just me. Okay, cool.
Especially the last 30 years.
Yeah.
I work with the school business, no church.
Yeah. We whether intentionally or unintentionally, oftentimes we do surround ourselves with people of faith, and we gravitate towards people that think like us, that attend church with us, or maybe they attend a different church, but we gravitate to those kinds of people because we have a lot in common. So my excuse for this is that I'm employed to work with you guys, not with those guys. You know what I mean? That's my excuse. It's not a good enough excuse, but that's just my excuse. But yeah, sometimes I feel like I don't know enough people. And so we'll talk about this a little bit as we go on throughout the class. And then Chris.
Is that you, at some point, you have to make some decision about whether you think they're lost.
Yeah.
And that's what's really hard.
Yeah.
I think a lot about our clothing brand.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. For those of y'all that don't know, 40 to 44 families every Monday come and get clothing assistance here. Okay, like 40 different families every Monday.
And they can't come back until 2 months later.
Yeah.
So it's on a 2 month. It's a 2 month cycle of 40 to 44 different families every Monday, and then it doesn't repeat itself until 2 months later.
And if you talk to the crew, incredible crew that works up there, I mean, it's 95% are Hispanic. Okay. And so it's like this most unbelievable outreach program offering assistance in this community. I mean, it is the gold standard for Wise County as far as that process. And then here's where it gets, are they lost or not? I mean, do we have something to evangelize? We need to share the gospel message with them. And you can 100% make the assumption that they are probably Catholic in some form of just their life, whether they're what level of activity, but so then you have to ask this question, okay? I mean, should I be evangelizing to this family, that has a physical need, okay, which we're wonderfully fulfilling? Are they lost?
Yeah. Well,
That's where the internal conflict.
Yeah.
Is, I think, approaching something. That's just one example.
Yeah. And the only way that you can figure out the answer to that question is relationship.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's one thing that, there's a ton of different things that we can talk about. The clothing room is one example, but there's dozens, maybe more than that we could talk about that our church is already involved in and doing. And so one of the questions that I always want to ask is, okay, what else? This is what's going on right now. Okay, well, what's the next step? We've got 40 to 44 families. So how do we continue to welcome those people, provide what their need is? And the next step might be relationship. How do we help find a way for us to have a connection with them beyond just serving their need, right? And so, it probably doesn't go clothing room, baptism. There's probably a couple steps in between, right? And so we probably need to put some thought, intentionality, and effort into not just for the clothing room, but for any number of things. Okay, well, what's the next step at my job? This person who sits at the desk next to me, what's the next step? Is the next step for me to see them in a setting outside of work? What's the next step? What's the next thing? And so those are important questions that we can kind of think about. And then, Chris, you already mentioned this one just a second ago. See, here we go again. There we go. Evangelism happens overseas, right? And we're going to talk about this a little bit next week too. This idea, churches of Christ don't have a centralized mission effort, right? Every church has their own individual mission effort. But what we've done is we've convinced ourselves that the other countries, when we go on mission trips, that's where we take the gospel. We take the gospel to other places when we go on these special trips. And so we'll talk about this one next week a little bit, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more later on today too. But yeah, these are some of the reasons that I came up with, and there's probably any number more reasons why we might not evangelize too. So really quickly, I want to check my time. I think I have time to do this, but one thing that I have been thinking about is churches as a whole, not our church, but churches as a whole are going through this rapid phase right now of redefinition, mostly decline, with a few churches, oftentimes more of the larger mega church type places, experiencing growth. And most of the time that a church experiences growth, it's because of transfer. So a church is dwindling, it's becoming smaller, and people are leaving and going to larger churches because of services that they provide, ministries that they offer. They have a better preacher, they have a better worship, any number of reasons, right? And so most of the time churches right now are growing is because of transfer. It's not because of conversion or evangelism. So for some churches it is. I don't want to paint the picture that no one's evangelizing, but oftentimes that's the case. And so I was thinking about this, and I don't want to go too much into this, but I was thinking about the context that Rebecca and I just came from, and Skillman in Dallas is kind of going through a similar experience right now, where the church is dwindling, it's slowing down, and they're trying to figure out what comes next. And so what they did is they came up with 5 different options for the church to consider. And these are the things that they're thinking about right now, about what it means to continue to be a church as they're declining and dwindling. So the first option is to downsize ministries and facilities. So you would sell your building, you would maybe buy or build another building with the proceeds of the sale, and you would consolidate, and then you have to find something that your church can offer to the community. So it's not just about condensing, it's about condensing, but then what's our thing going to be? How are we going to be known in our area? Another one is a church plant partnership. So there are, even in the midst of all these churches going through decline and things like that, there are lots of churches that are being planted that have a lot of momentum right now. They might not have a facility. And so, okay, what would it look like for us to share a facility with one of these church plants that's got a lot of energy, a lot of vibrancy right now? So, maybe they come in and rent part of our facility while we still continue to meet, and we're coexisting in different spaces of the building. Another one is if your church can't decide on what it wants to do, maybe you just simply split up. You say, okay, this group wants to do this thing over here. This group wants to do this thing over here. So we're going to divide and conquer. So we'll split the resources in half. You guys go do this ministry over there. We'll go do this ministry over there. And we'll see if we can divide and conquer and cover twice as much ground that way. Another option is to satellite. There are some churches that are doing this right now where rather than continuing as their own independent, autonomous congregation, they're satelliting with another church. So the Hills is a great example of this. They've got a couple of different satellite campuses where, especially the one in I think both of them, actually, Southlake and West Fort Worth, were churches that were struggling. And so they satellited those churches, and so they became a part of the Hills. And so they streamed Rick from their North Richland Hills campus to these other churches, and they became a part of the Hills. So that's one. And then the other one that they came up with is that they could start over and ask for help from other local congregations. So this is kind of what Skillman's trying to do right now. We'll see how they do, but they're trying to start over, which is essentially to take everything that they've done and raise it to 0 and start over. So they're doing that with their eldership right now. Their eldership is going to 0, and they're going to try to start over. The ministry staff has basically already done this. It's pretty much gone to zero. There's one person left, and so they're starting over, trying to figure out, okay, we got to start over, and we got to ask some people for help. So the reason I bring this up is because this is the result, I think, of an attitude of what I call empire church. Empire church is we want to collect all of our resources, and we want to build ourselves up, and at the end of the day, people will see how grand and mighty we are. That might be a little bit too pessimistic. Let me see if I can phrase that a way that's not so pessimistic. I'm a pessimist by nature, so I always think that things are terrible. That was really pessimistic. So let me try to rephrase that. Empire church is perhaps where you say we want to make sure that we're the best church that we can be. We want to have the best programs. We want to have the best people. We want people to look at us and see this is a fantastic church. And the only problem with that, I think, is that it doesn't have very much to do with Jesus. It has a lot to do with your own specific church. And it doesn't have a lot to do with what I see happening in the Bible. And so what I would advocate for is more of a kingdom approach. So, empire is more of a top-down approach, and kingdom, go with me. This is one of those images and metaphors. I told you I like those. Empires and kingdoms are not that different. But kingdom is the type of language that Jesus used to describe what he's bringing to the world, right? So that's what I'm trying to invoke in us is the language that Jesus brought. So kingdom is this idea of, okay, let's give things over to the king. Let's try to follow the Spirit's lead. And so that there's a little bit of a distinction. I don't know if I'm making it very well this morning or not. But okay, thank you. And you'll find that yes, empire is me. Yeah, and you'll find that that's going to be true a lot when I talk. I things make a lot of sense in my mind, and then they come out and they don't make much sense. So, but I think it's important for us to try to go the kingdom route rather than the empire route. So when we think about evangelism and trying to have intentional conversations with people, all of those questions that churches, and Skillman's not the only one asking those questions. There's dozens of churches that are asking those very same questions. And it's important for us to always keep in mind, okay, what would it look like for us to ask these types of questions, not trying to keep ourselves alive, not trying to keep the memory of what once was alive, but instead to say, what is the Spirit leading us into? And I think that's where I'm trying to move us to, is this intentional question of where is the Spirit trying to lead us into? Where is God's Spirit at work in my life, in the lives of the people that I know, in the lives of the people that God is leading me towards? And I think that is a better thing to ask. So I want to just really quickly introduce you to two things. I don't know if they're models. They were thought-provoking to me as I was kind of thinking about this class and how I wanted to start. So the first one is called, let me see if I can find the title of it. The first one is called A Growth Projector. And already that title is making me think more empire than kingdom. But I like some of the questions well, essentially what this growth projector is it's 20 questions, and they ask you to rate your church your church or yourself. It's written for a church, but I think I want to ask you to do it personally in your mind. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not very much and 5 being a lot. How would you answer these questions? What's going on in your life or in your church's life? And so these are the questions that had to do on that 20-question questionnaire about intentional growth. So when you think about trying to be intentional with sharing the gospel, these are the types of questions that we could ask ourselves or that we could ask about our church. Does your church or you pray specifically for your community and for those who are not Christians? So again, this would be the type of thing where a 1 would be not very much and a 5 would be a lot. And then, in between, you can do 2, 3, 4 as well. Does your church train members on how to share their faith? Well, that's what we're trying to do right now. We're trying to at least have a conversation about being intentional about this. Does your church have specific plans and actions to invite people to your church? Does your church have specific plans and actions to reach unchurched people in your community on an ongoing basis? Does your church regularly evaluate and develop plans and strategies to reach the unchurched? And do your members recognize that evangelism is a high priority? So I think these are good questions for us to reflect on because we probably in this room, we'd all give different answers to those questions because we have different experiences and different things in our minds of what's going on or what's not going on. But these are good questions, I think, for us to ask ourselves. It's good for us to ask of the church as well. But okay, for my life, do I have a specific plan of how I'm going to talk to somebody? If I find myself in a conversation with somebody who's not a believer in Jesus, what's my game plan? How am I going to go about introducing the concept of Jesus or faith to them? What does that look like? So I think these are helpful questions for us to think about. And so I saw a couple people maybe taking a photo. I think that's great. Feel free to spend some time reflecting on these if you have a moment. And then the second one, this one was again a model that was intended for an entire congregation, but it's called the conversion ratio. And so the idea behind this is that whenever a person is baptized, it takes usually more than just one person to get to that point, right? You probably have somebody that they know who maybe invited them to the church. Then they maybe come to one of these types of settings where they come to a Bible class and they meet some other people. And so how many people on the faith side does it take for one person to be baptized? Is that making sense? And I don't know that this is very scientific. This is just what this model threw out there. But what they said was that if it takes 20 Christians for one non-Christian to become a Christian, they would consider that a healthy ratio. So we look around the room here, and I'd guess there's maybe about 40 of us in here this morning, give or take. And so if this room were to bring 2 people to faith, this model would consider that a healthy approach. 21 to 50 people, they would say that's somewhat healthy. 51 to 80, they would say that's somewhat unhealthy. And then 81 to 1 person or more, they would say that's unhealthy. And so the point of the model of the thing that they're introducing is it's important that a community of people surround. It's not just a one-to-one. It's important that there be more people involved because that'll lead to more connection points for that person if they come to faith. But you also don't want it to take 100 people to bring one person to faith. That's not utilizing a lot of intentionality, and you have too many people involved to get one person to a baptism. So anyways, this is an interesting thing for us to think about as far as, okay, how many people is it taking us to bring somebody to faith? And one way that you can do this is just take your average annual attendance and divide it by how many people your church has baptized in that year. And so then you would kind of get that type of ratio number of, okay, well, what did that look like? And that may or may not be the actual, it may only be 10 people who are doing the work, but anyways, so hopefully, does this make sense? I know some people in here are numbers and data kind of people. So I thought that this would be a helpful thing for some of us to include. Somebody respond to this idea.
Okay, I get it. I think that this is a good ratio that was probably studied across churches who are none of them that good at this, but it's a way to say it in such a way that you kind of can just come up with a stat.
Yeah.
So it's kind of good for this church health seminar maybe or something.
Yeah.
But if I push back a little bit,
Sure.
I would say this kind of takes too much accountability away from each of us as individuals.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, I'm trying, but I can't find 19 other people, so I can't say it.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to share the gospel.
Right.
And then, so that's not a pessimistic way of saying it. But then, the encouraging way of saying it, I also believe that nobody has 20 friends, 20 incredible relationships. It's actually just not possible. You have 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 just warrior, just friends that surround you and that you count on and live life with and stuff. And so, man, I think that just like super healthy, gonna live forever is if it's taken 3 to 5 people to bring somebody.
Yeah.
And so, which really raises the bar for all of us. Because people don't know what you know until you know how much you care.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever going to know how 20 people care about.
Yeah.
They'll sure know how 3 people just are going to walk with them through life.
Yeah, and so that's helpful. What I misrepresented this then is what I would say. They're not saying that this is 20 people equally pulling the weight on this, but imagine you're brand new and yeah.
Just says, okay, this is kind of statistically of churches that exist.
Right.
This is kind of what it looks like.
Yeah, but if they're a family and they've got kids, okay, well, the children's minister or the person who's teaching that children's class is a connection. It might not be a really close connection, but that person was involved in, okay, hey, I could see myself coming here. They've got a good program for my kids. They're people who care about my kids. They might not be sitting down and having dinner and having faith conversations with that person, but that child care worker was involved in this 20-to-1 ratio kind of thing. That's what I was trying to say. Go ahead, Leslie.
As I look at this, this is just a scorecard.
Yeah.
But you think about first century, the ratio was way skewed the other side.
Yeah.
It was pretty telling the story about that 5,000.
Yeah.
Think about how long that took to get them all over the world.
That's right.
1, 2, 3, quick go.
And our part of the world is different.
Mhm.
Because where we live, I would venture to say 75% of people know Christ in some form or fashion. Maybe not at the level I do.
Yeah.
Ron does. But I think back to a time when I was in auctioneer school. Another guy named Jordan Hunter who was head of FCA in Missouri. We're always talking about church stuff, and then we host a Sunday morning service the last day. And Justin Roth, who is from Nebraska, comes to us that afternoon with a great coffee. He goes, I want what y'all have. I've grown up my whole life not going to church. My parents say I'm Catholic, but we never did.
Mm.
And I'm thinking, we never really had the conversation. But he's lived his whole life not knowing church. Because
Yeah.
our Lord it wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's,
Yeah.
depends on where you live. So these numbers aren't always
That's right. Yeah.
truthful.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll reiterate too. I don't know what the methodology is behind how they determine what is healthy and what is unhealthy, right? It's probably like kind of what David was saying as far as what they've looked at. Churches that are growing, experiencing growth, this is what they've seen. Yeah.
Like church growth, and there's individual.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
And that's what I was kind of looking at, is because it's a little different when we used to have those tent meetings.
Yeah.
Actually, baptized compared to an in-house situation.
Right.
You have your children sign up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was just questioning the numbers.
Yeah. So again, I don't want to represent this as this is what we need to aim for necessarily, but I thought it was thought provoking at least to say, okay, if we were to look, so the math for us would roughly be if we started down here at the 81, the math for us would be 3 baptisms a year or less. So if we hit that, we're hitting this unhealthy mark. If we were to hit 4 baptisms a year, we'd hit the somewhat unhealthy. If we were to hit 5 to 11 baptisms, we'd be getting up here. And if we were to hit 12 or more, we'd be hitting up here. So for us, where we're at as a church right now, this would mean about once a month, ideally, we'd be baptizing somebody, right? Whether that's a child that we're raising in the church or somebody from the community. That's what this model would say is a healthy way of a conversion ratio, a healthy conversion ratio. So anyways, just something for us to think about. What does that look like? Okay, well, how can we do a better job of being more intentional, one-on-one, in group settings of bringing people in and saying, we want to put some intentionality towards this. We want to put some effort towards this because we think this is an important aspect because it's an obedience, right?
Evangelism class. I think it's fair to say that we're going to make an assumption that the body that is here and the children that we're raising, that's why.
Yeah.
We know that. I mean, we're choosing to be here because we think it's the best shot at our kids and grandkids becoming Christians.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're in the pipeline. Okay. I don't think they get to count on this ratio.
Yeah.
So I think if you're talking about evangelism,
Yeah.
the health of the church, you're talking about are we reaching the lost in our community that aren't in the pipeline?
Right.
Okay, and boy, it's going to look a lot ugly.
Yeah. So I agree, but I will also push back a little bit because this is a time that our children are leaving church at a rate higher than it has ever happened before in my lifetime and probably in many of ours. So I agree, but I'm also going to offer that as a little bit. Right. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we succeeding or failing in that?
Right.
Okay.
Yep. So, okay, good. Well, okay, we're running out of time really quickly. So what I want to do is I want to actually look at the Bible for a second. Can we do that? Instead of thinking about my crazy brain, because it's crazy town. Oh my goodness. There we go. Okay. So this is Matthew 10, I'm sorry, I wanted to read through all these passages and get some comments, and I took too long on the other stuff. So I apologize. But Matthew 10, this is where Jesus is sending out the 12, and then he sends out the 72. Fascinating passage. It starts back at the end of chapter 9 and continues all the way through chapter 10. Really one of the more bizarre teachings of Jesus. If you want to read something that's really kind of odd, go read Matthew chapter 10 because it's a little bit out there. But it's really good stuff too. So I've underlined verse 7 here. And so as you go, proclaim this message: the kingdom of heaven has come near. And so this is what Jesus wants his people to tell people. Hey, the kingdom is here. It's coming. It's near. It's nearby. And then he gives them instructions about how to go about doing that. Heal the sick, raise the dead. I'm hoping Jesus is not asking us to raise the dead, because I'd have some issues with that, because I don't think I could do it. I don't know if I have faith enough. But cleanse out those, he gives these instructions. He tells them how to do this. And he ends it. Jason has been quoting this a lot. Jason Brooks has been quoting this a lot. If you've been here on Wednesday nights, this verse: I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves, therefore be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. So if you've heard Jason say that, this is where this comes from. Being as cunning as a serpent. This is where that verse is in Matthew 10. But he's telling people, go tell people the kingdom of heaven has come near. And then we already mentioned this one just a quick second ago, or really at the beginning of class. But the Matthew 28, how close can I get to you guys? Reb, can you help me out? Thank you. The Matthew 28 passage where Jesus says, therefore go and make disciples of all nations. And what I love about this too is back in this Matthew 10, he's telling his disciples to go specifically to the lost children of Israel. And then here in Matthew 28, he expands it and says, go into all nations. And so and we'll look at this too in the context of Acts.